The cafe smelled of roasted beans and luxury, polished wood, golden chandeliers, and a quiet symphony of murmured conversations. At a corner table, a man in a tailored black suit sat sipping his morning espresso, scrolling through his phone with the air of someone who owned the place. His name was Richard Crown, a billionaire real estate magnate known for his ruthless business tactics and colder heart. He had everything money could buy: cars, power, respect built on fear, yet not an ounce of humility. And that morning, fate had decided to teach him a lesson he would never forget. Across the street, a group of bikers parked their roaring machines outside the cafe. The sound of their engines cut through the polished silence, drawing judgmental stares from the elite customers. Their leather jackets read Iron Riders, and they carried themselves with the rugged confidence of men who lived by their own rules. Among them was Jake Turner, their leader, a man built like stone, with a gray beard, tattoos crawling up his arms, and eyes that spoke of wars no one else could see. Jake wasn't there to cause trouble. He had simply come to grab a cup of coffee with his crew after finishing a charity ride for orphaned kids. But life, as always, had other plans. As Jake walked inside, his towering presence caught everyone's attention. The murmurs grew louder. The rich man at the corner, Richard, glanced up from his phone with disgust. He saw only a rough biker, not a man with a story, not someone who had spent his morning helping children who had nothing. Just another nobody walking into his world. And that's when arrogance turned into cruelty. Jake approached the counter politely, ordered his drink, and stepped aside. But as he turned, he accidentally brushed against Richard's table. A few drops of coffee splashed on the billionaire's cuff. Richard shot up like a spark ignited by gasoline. "Watch where you're going, you filthy animal!" he snapped. The cafe fell silent. Everyone stared, frozen. Jake tried to apologize, calm and composed, saying he hadn't meant to, but Richard's ego couldn't stand being touched by a man in leather. Without thinking, without a shred of decency, Richard grabbed his cup of steaming coffee and threw it straight into Jake's face. The boiling liquid splashed across Jake's skin, and he staggered back with a muffled grunt. His crew rushed toward him, but he raised a hand, stopping them. The room went cold. Richard stood there smirking, satisfied, as if he'd just put a beast in his place. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, humility, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel Xposed Tales, and share this story. Let's remind the world that no one deserves to be disrespected because of how they look. Jake wiped his face with a napkin, his jaw tightening. The cafe manager looked terrified, unsure what to do. One of Jake's men, a tall biker named Mason, muttered, "Boss, just say the word." But Jake stayed silent. He looked at Richard for a long, heavy moment, not with anger, but with something deeper, pity. Then he simply said, "Let's go." As the Iron Riders left, Richard chuckled and sat back down, feeling victorious. He thought he had humiliated a man beneath him. What he didn't know was that Jake Turner had once been a soldier, a decorated Marine, a man who had saved lives, lost friends, and rebuilt himself after the world broke him. And the man Richard had just burned in public was about to become the one person standing between him and a fate that would shatter his pride. Hours later, the skies turned gray. Richard's meeting with investors went south when news broke that his latest project had failed inspection. His phone buzzed endlessly with angry calls. Frustrated and seething, he stormed out of the hotel, got into his car, and sped off down the highway. His thoughts were a blur of ego and rage. He didn't notice the truck swerving ahead of him until it was too late. The crash came like thunder. Metal twisted, glass shattered, and in seconds, the billionaire's luxury car flipped into a ditch. Smoke billowed from the engine. Trapped and bleeding, Richard screamed for help, but the road was empty. No one could hear him, except one man. A few miles down, Jake and his crew were riding back after their charity stop. Mason spotted the wreck first. "Boss, that's the same car from the cafe," he shouted. Jake slowed down, his eyes narrowing. He could have ignored it. No one would have blamed him. But that wasn't who he was. The Iron Riders pulled over. Jake ran to the crushed car, his face still red from burns, his heart pounding. Through the shattered window, he saw Richard, unconscious, blood trickling down his temple. The sight made him pause. For a moment, the memory of hot coffee flashed through his mind. The pain, the humiliation, the laughter. But then something inside him whispered, Be better than him. Jake broke the window with his elbow, unlocked the door, and with the help of his crew, dragged Richard out. The car caught fire seconds later. They laid him on the grass, and Jake checked his pulse. Still alive. Barely. "Call an ambulance," he ordered. Mason hesitated after what he did, but Jake cut him off. No excuses. A man's life is a man's life. When Richard opened his eyes, he saw the blur of faces, the same bikers he had mocked, and standing over him was Jake, the man whose face he had burned, pressing a cloth against his wound. The realization hit him like a hammer. His lips trembled. Why?" Jake just said softly, "because no one deserves to die alone." Minutes later, the ambulance arrived. The bikers helped load him in, then disappeared before the reporters could swarm. But word spread fast. A gang of bikers had saved a wealthy businessman after a highway crash. No one knew the backstory, but fate had already written it. When Richard recovered days later, he couldn't forget that. The moment, the smell of smoke, the rough hands that saved him, the voice that refused revenge. He looked in the mirror and saw the bandage on his face, and guilt that ran deeper than any wound. He tried to track Jake down. It took him days, but eventually he found the Iron Riders clubhouse, an old warehouse turned workshop at the edge of town. The moment he stepped in, all conversations stopped. Dozens of tattooed men looked up. Richard's polished shoes clicked on the concrete floor as he walked toward Jake, who was fixing a motorcycle. Jake didn't even glance up at first. "You got something to say?" he asked calmly. Richard's voice trembled. "I came to apologize." For the first time, Jake looked at him. There was no anger, no pride, just quiet strength. Richard swallowed hard and continued, "I was raised to think money made me better, that I could buy respect. But that day, you showed me what real humanity looks like. You saved my life when I didn't deserve it. I can't undo what I did, but I can start being a different man." Jake studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then start today." Richard looked around and saw a donation box labeled Ride for Orphans. Without hesitation, he pulled out his checkbook and wrote a massive donation. Not as charity, but as redemption. He spent the day there, talking with the bikers, learning their stories. He discovered that most of them were veterans, men society had tossed aside. They weren't criminals. They were survivors, building hope with grease-stained hands. Weeks turned into months. The billionaire and the biker became unlikely friends. Richard helped fund the group's charity rides, built a community shelter for homeless veterans, and found a new purpose. One that didn't involve stock markets or corporate greed. But one evening, while they were sitting by a campfire after another long ride, Richard asked Jake a question that had haunted him. "Why did you save me that day? After what I did?" Jake stared into the flames, his voice steady. "Because I've seen too many men die hating themselves. I didn't want you to be one of them." Richard nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. For the first time he understood. True strength wasn't in power or wealth. It was in compassion, in forgiveness. Months later, a journalist interviewed Jake about his friendship with Richard Crown. Jake just smiled and said, "He's not the man you read about in the news. He's the man who learned what respect really means, the hard way." And when the story aired, millions were moved. Comments flooded in, people sharing how they too had judged others too quickly, how they had been humbled by kindness. The world saw that change was possible, even for those who seemed beyond redemption. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Xposed Tales for more powerful stories that remind us what it means to be human. Before you go, tell us in the comments, do you believe people truly change when life humbles them? Because sometimes it takes one cup of hot coffee and one act of mercy to turn a cruel man into a compassionate soul.